Hey there, this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani, and today's video is going to be on carbohydrate timing. There's a couple of interesting techniques out there that can be used to help with adrenal fatigue and or improving fat loss or having better workouts at the gym. And this is typically using carbohydrates and timing them at certain times in the meal, otherwise known as carbohydrate backloading. So let's take a look at the ideas behind it and what some of the physiological rationale why you may do that. So first off, we have our cortisol timing, or our cortisol rhythm, which is a natural rhythm throughout the day based on light and dark cycles. So essentially, right around 6 a.m. here is typically when our cortisol is the highest. That gives us energy to get out of bed. Again, cortisol is a glucocorticosteroid. You break that word down, the first half is glucose, pertaining to glucose, blood sugar, and energy. So getting that energy in the morning gets us out of bed, gets us motivated, and gets us working and getting off to work ideally. So ideally at this time, we don't need that much carbohydrate because we got a lot of cortisol already mobilizing sugar. So it's already doing that, so we really don't want to be eating carbohydrate at that time outside of non-starchy vegetables. So when I talk about carbohydrate, we're going to reference it from the point of starchy carbohydrate, right? Plantains, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, yuca, jicama, things like that. And then we have our fruit, and our fruit's on a spectrum of low to medium to high. So typically when we're talking carbohydrates, we're referencing almost all of the range of fruit, but primarily medium and high sugar fruits like your tropical fruits, bananas, papayas, mangoes, pineapples, oranges, apples, etc. Typically the berries are on the low sugar side, but even in the first 2 meals of the day, when we talk about carbohydrate timing, we go here, the first half of the day, we really only want to focus on protein, fats, and maybe some vegetables for your carbohydrate sources, your non-starchy carbohydrate sources. So let's dig in here, right? We have our cortisol highest in the morning, so we really want to avoid carbohydrates outside of our non-starchy veg, and even in the afternoon too. So you can see our cortisol curve fluctuates kind of like a roller coaster ride. Now, as we have adrenal fatigue, what tends to happen is that whole entire ride being up here now starts to lessen. And as we start going more into dysfunction, or HPA, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, hypothalamus and pituitary being in the brain, adrenals being the adrenals, we have this communicational imbalance. And the rhythm actually goes low and then even starts to flip, where it starts to go a little bit higher at night, relatively speaking. And this is helpful because you can see as this cortisol drops throughout the day, our cortisol is the lowest at night. And there's a process known as gluconeogenesis. And this process, if you just break down big words, gluco meaning blood glucose, neo meaning new, and genesis meaning forming. So it's forming new blood sugar out of, guess what? Protein. And this process is actually cortisol dependent. So you can see here, we need some cortisol to make that process happen. So the nice thing about this is at nighttime our cortisol is the lowest. So if our cortisol is, let's say here at night, let's say it's even a little bit lower because we have adrenal fatigue, well, guess what's going to happen if our blood sugar is on the lower side then? Because we're eating super low carb throughout the whole entire day. Well, what may happen is this cortisol may have to come back up because we're facilitating this process known as gluconeogenesis. So with some of my patients, I find they benefit by getting a little bit of starchy carbohydrate, just a little bit, some slow carbohydrates, if you will, if you're into the 4-hour body kind of thing. Slow carbohydrates at night, just to have a little bit of a time release. And what that does is it buffers this cortisol. So instead of the cortisol having to come to the rescue, the little bit of slow carbs that are in our diet are actually coming to the rescue instead. And I find some people that are on a lower carbohydrate diet for too long, or maybe having too much activity in their life, they can benefit by having a little bit of slow carbs at night, especially on days where they've trained, exercise-wise. This may not be for everyone. Again, some people do very well on a low carbohydrate diet in general. My bias is towards a low carbohydrate diet because I've done significantly better myself and seen a lot of patients, but I do have this extra element or filter that we add in with certain people where we may add a little bit of slow carbohydrates in at night just to see how we can affect this whole entire gluconeogenic process and maybe take a little bit of stress off the adrenal glands. So how I do it is simple. protein and fats the first half of the day. So breakfast and lunch, only proteins and fats. How that looks, well, let's say today it was bacon and eggs. Yesterday it was beef protein in a shake with collagen and coconut milk. And then lunch was tuna and avocado with some mustard and some kale. So you can see that's kind of how I've done it the last couple of days, right? Protein, fat, a little bit of non-starch veg, protein, fat, and then at night, maybe I'll have a half a sweet potato cut up with some butter and some cinnamon on there with my ground up meat or my wild Alaskan sockeye salmon with some vegetables that were sauteed in butter or coconut oil. So you can see how you can add that in just a little bit, and it's especially great after a workout, after a resistance training workout, and we'll go into why that is. So you can see here, carbohydrate primarily at dinner. We're talking about some of those starchy, slower carbs, which could be plantain chips. It could be a little bit of white potato, as long as we're not sensitive to that. It could be yams or sweet potato. It could be yucca. It could be a whole host of things. Again, rutabagas. It could be radishes, things like that. I tend to go to the plantains. I tend to go to the sweet potatoes, and I'll even tend to go to a little bit of the, what else would I go to? And a little bit of the white potato every now and then. So you can see what's happening here. Let's dial down. So we have a workout, right? We exercise. We do a couple of things when we exercise. We increase cortisol a little bit, okay? While at the same time we increase HGH, okay? And insulin, for the lack of a better word, is going to actually drop because we're burning a lot of that energy up in our bloodstream, right? All that sugar is being mobilized from our muscles. We're burning it up. So we don't need much insulin because insulin's a storage hormone. If we're burning, we don't want to be packing things away. We want to be actually working out and utilizing that fuel for energy. So this is what's happening during workout right here. Now, after the workout, it's a different ball game. Now, typically, here's our muscles. This is our muscle belly. We can hold about 300 grams of carbohydrate, 3 to 350 in our muscles, and we can hold about 60 to 70 grams of carbohydrate in the liver. So our liver is really important for blood sugar stability, and our muscle is a great reservoir. So one of the great things that we can do to help with blood sugar stability is we can build muscle. And that muscle will allow us to burn sugar for fuel primarily. It will allow us to increase growth hormone. We'll talk about the cortisol and the insulin in a second. So what happens is we have these various receptors, these GLUT receptors. So in the muscle belly, we have GLUT4. And actually, in the liver, we have GLUT5 for fructose primarily. The liver is going to be a primary source for sugar, but again, it's going to be 80% fructose going to the liver. And that's the problem, because in today's day and age, we have so much fructose being consumed with higher sugar fruits, agaves, sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup, lots of refined sugar. So what's happening is you can see the sugar molecule comes in here like this. It binds into the receptor site just like so. And again, we don't need much insulin with high fructose corn syrup. Again, it's not really affecting, when it goes into the liver, it's not affecting insulin directly. But what happens is it gets the liver so saturated full of fructose and sugar. What happens is it causes systemic insulin resistance, because then for the liver to do what it has to do and release all that sugar, the body is pumping a whole bunch of insulin in here. Okay, just like so, because everything flows through the liver. So we have this vein right here called the hepatic portal vein, and everything has to flow through there. And if we're constantly getting bombarded with so much sugar and there's so much insulin from the blood, that's going to cause insulin resistance at the liver. Even though fructose isn't necessarily affecting it directly, indirectly it's creating systemic insulin resistance. That's why a lot of people have said fructose is okay because its glycemic index is out of 20, right? Glycemic index is how fast sugar goes into the bloodstream, right? Glucose is at around 100, fructose is right around 20 or 30, all right? So you can see what's happening here is people have okayed fruit and high fructose stuff because it's got a lower glycemic index. But what it's doing, it's creating systemic insulin resistance because all this sugar is making its way right to the liver. And again, what happens is these GLUT5 receptors just pull it right in, and in the muscle we have GLUT4. Now we can induce a lot of these GLUT4 receptors by coming to the surface by exercise, by resistance training. It's a very great way to start pulling sugar out of the bloodstream. Sugar in the bloodstream can be damaging due to its advanced glycation end products, AGEs. So if we pull them out of the bloodstream, pull them in the muscle, ideally, we have a really good effect of burning them up and utilizing them for energy. And that's why staying away from fructose is so important, because fructose creates systemic insulin resistance because it goes primarily, right, to the liver. So if we can pull the fructose out of the equation and do more glucose, and that's where a slower starch comes in here. That's where a slower starch comes in because that's primarily glucose, which is going to the muscles. Where if we're doing fructose up here, then that's going to be a significant impediment. And again, something like low glycemic berries, like raspberries or blueberries or strawberries or blackberries, very, very low amount of fructose there. Right? So anyone that's dealing with that issue, I recommend keeping it under 15 grams of fructose per day if they're really, really sensitive, 15 to 25. And I did a video just last week on that exact topic, so check that video out. So again, what happens here is if we then take a carbohydrate meal, if we then induce and we eat a little bit of carbs, this is the real interesting thing. This is why timing up your carbs at night can be really helpful, because when we eat a little bit of carbs, one of the things that insulin does, it drives down cortisol. So if we have a little bit of insulin, right, if we stimulate insulin with some of those carbohydrates, that's going to drive down cortisol. Okay, your HGH is actually going to stay up really high, and insulin is actually used by a lot of bodybuilders as well because it's a storage hormone. It pulls things into the muscle. We can do it by manipulating diet and timing our diet. So cortisol down, HGH high, and we'll start driving our insulin up just a little bit as a means of pulling carbohydrate into the muscle, as a means of decreasing cortisol, and as a means of modulating growth hormone. And if we time in some protein as well, there's a research showing that 20 to 30 grams of good quality protein right after a workout, especially in the form of whey protein or grass-fed whey protein, can increase growth hormone significantly. So that's a nice little aspect there. So regarding carbohydrate timing, the take-home message is protein and fat the first half to 3/4 of the day. Time in your slow carbohydrates at night, keeping the fructose down so we're getting sugars that are going more to the muscle here, and less to the liver right there. So we're avoiding systemic insulin resistance, and we're using insulin to our benefit to modulate the drop in cortisol, increase growth hormone, and still maintain insulin sensitivity. Again, this is Dr. Justin here. Click on screen so you can get a hold of me. If you're having any issues regarding your adrenals or energy or your overall performance levels, click on screen to get a hold of me. Again, please subscribe if you're enjoying the videos and share as well. Thanks. Have a great day.